Welcome to HSBC Global Viewpoint, the podcast series that brings together business leaders and industry experts to explore the latest global insights, trends, and opportunities. Make sure you're subscribed to stay up to date with new episodes. Thanks for listening, and now on to today's show.
Hello and welcome to Under the Banyan Tree, where we put Asian markets and economics in context. I'm Fred Newman, Chief Asia Economist here at HSBC. And on today's podcast, we're looking at an economy that set itself a very ambitious growth target, and that is Vietnam. It is a big player in Asian supply chains with a reputation for fast reforms, but is double-digit growth really achievable? Joining me to help answer that is senior ASEAN economist Yun Liu from HSBC Global Investment Research. This is Under the Banyan Tree. So, Yun, we want to talk about Vietnam because there's a lot of headlines about Vietnam. We just had a party congress, which is sort of a key political meeting, and they re-elected the party secretary, To Lam is his name, and he has unveiled a lot of ambitions for the economy, for the country overall. Can you give us, some of the highlights there of what To Lam's targets are?
Yeah, that's right, Fred. I think the main target here for Vietnam to achieve is the growth target for the next 5 years, 2026 to 30, which is on average at least 10% of growth.
10%. Now, that is a punchy number.
Right.
Very few economies in the world achieve those types of growth rates. Of course, famously, mainland China has been able to do that for a while, Taiwan, Korea, some other countries in Asia. But 10% in this environment is quite a robust growth number. What do you think it would take? And we can talk about the export side a little bit later, but I want to focus on the domestic side because to sustain those growth rates, you need to energize the domestic economy. 100 million consumers.
Exactly.
Is that achievable?
It is. I mean, it has great potential. It has a large population, has young population, and there are also a lot of emerging middle class. So there's a lot of potential in bringing out the consumer power. I think the other thing for Vietnam that it wants to concentrate on is the infrastructure development, which is, very similar to what China did after the global financial crisis. So I think, Vietnam wants to kind of replicate that infrastructure playbook as well.
So big investment in infrastructure there. And of course, Vietnam has the need for infrastructure.
Right.
I mean, it's rapidly developing, but a rapidly developing economy needs better and better infrastructure. So it feels that there is a lot of projects to invest in. What are some of the key kind of signature infrastructure projects that we can expect coming through in Vietnam?
Well, I mean, there's already going to be the operation of a new airport in Ho Chi Minh City. Passenger traffic has been increasing significantly, so there's the need to build another airport there. The road connectivity has always been, one of the priorities here for Vietnam. And most importantly, Vietnam just unveiled its ambition to build a bullet train.
A bullet train? You mean a high-speed train that we see in mainland China, of course. Right. Japan has famously, the Shinkansen bullet train. And you're saying Vietnam is now next. They're going to build a bullet train. From where to where?
Connecting the north to the south. Just imagine, a flight from Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City. It's about an hour and a half right now.
There's about 2,000 kilometers.
It is. It's very long.
Yeah, it's a very long country. And if you took the train today, I guess they have conventional trains. How long would it take?
It probably takes you 36 hours.
36 hours.
Right.
Okay, well, then a bullet train, I think, would make a lot of sense just to cut down on travel time. So a lot of focus on transportation, for example, just hard infrastructure. Imagine energy is in there, port connectivity as well. And this has kind of taken a bit of a playbook from mainland China, as you said, after the global financial crisis. But I want to go back to a little bit to the consumption side. 100 million consumers, it's a huge market. but it's been stalling a little bit on the consumption side. What went on there? What's kind of held back Vietnam in recent years?
Yeah, well, I think the main constraint here was really because of the property saga that happened in late 2022, and then with a lasting impact. So there was the credit crunch, and for a lot of these Vietnamese consumers, the biggest wealth of household is concentrated in property sector. So if you saw quite a significant downturn in the sector, then it just means that your consumption power is eroding. The good news is that we are seeing some gradual improvements on the consumption part in 2024 and 2025. But I think it still takes a little bit of time for Vietnam to achieve very high consumption growth as in previous years.
That's interesting. So just like mainland China, the property market correction had some impact on consumer spending, but you seem to suggest that we might be sort of gradually getting through that wobble and that we might see strengthening.
Right, because it's not an overnight fix.
Yes. And then also there were a lot of reforms with regards to the way the government operates in Vietnam as well. And many countries we talk a lot about reforms, but often nothing much happens. Vietnam, huge changes, no?
Yeah, exactly. So Vietnam last year went through two major administrative reforms. One is that Vietnam shrank the workforce of the government by 100,000 people.
100,000 people,
yes.
Civil servants.
That's right. And then it also involved some mergers of ministries and agencies as well.
And so that was the other major leg of the reforms?
No, the other one here is actually to merge the provinces, because Vietnam used to have more than 60 provinces. It slashed by half. So over 30. And again, it completed just in a few months' time.
So what impresses me is just the speed with which Vietnam moves, right? So it's certainly the government is on a mission here, more efficiency, more productivity, efficient spending, more investment. But we have to talk about the external sector. Maybe there's a great time to take a quick break. But when we come back, I want to talk about Vietnam's competitiveness and how Vietnam is likely to fare in the world where we see increases in tariffs. So welcome back. Ewan, before the break, we talked about Vietnam's growth ambitions, pushing growth, GDP growth up to above 10%, which is, of course, quite an ambitious target. There's a lot going on domestic side, and it's a large domestic economy, actually. But I wanted to ask you, where Vietnam has stood out in recent years is really in terms of its export competitiveness. It's gained market share in many industries from electronics manufacturing, garment exports, you name it. But there's a lot of uncertainty there with U.S. tariffs coming in. How has Vietnam actually dealt with that uncertainty in terms of this export sector over the past year?
Yeah, I remember at the beginning of last year when the tariffs announcement were made on Liberation Day, Vietnam faced the highest tariff in Asia.
Now, Liberation Day was, of course, when the U.S. announced major tariffs on many, many other economies, which presumably for Vietnam was a bit of a shock.
Yeah, it was.
So export
I think it was a shock for everyone, but I mean, especially for Vietnam, because back then Vietnam faced tariffs as high as 46%. But obviously, after negotiations, now Vietnam's facing tariffs of 20%, which is the same as other EM countries in ASEAN. And based on the trade data we saw last year, Vietnam actually has defied the tariffs, achieving record high trade. And it's not only about exports, booming trade with the U.S. It's literally about diversification. We've also
and what explains that? So there's a lot of headlines about trade restrictions, et cetera, coming through. Why is Vietnam basically outcompeting many of its peers around the world? Why is Vietnam continuing to make those export gains?
Well, I think that one thing is really because of the tariffs. Now everybody is on the same starting line again when we look at all these EM markets in Southeast Asia. So whoever are the existing beneficiaries, Malaysia, Vietnam, they continue to be the outperformers, which is
so the tariffs matter less because everybody has the same tariffs more or less. But then means that it's the fundamentals that matter. And you're saying Vietnam has cheap labor force, good infrastructure.
Right.
What distinguishes Vietnam?
Well, I mean, cheap labor force and good infrastructure are advantages. But when we think about the structural factors like, how many free trade agreements you have with other countries, how competitive your output is, and I think one important thing here is how successful all these ASEAN countries are in translating the cheaper imports from China successfully into widening market shares in Western markets. Because I heard a lot of the concerns from Southeast Asia, or a lot of the countries are facing fierce competition from Chinese products, but it's not as simple as that.
So you're saying Vietnam is quite successful in part because it's using Chinese components, including that in its own production process, and that gives it a leg up globally because it has sort of an integrated supply chain with some of the very competitive Chinese suppliers,
exactly.
And that helps Vietnamese producers.
Yeah, it's very much complementary to the Chinese supply chain.
And what are some of the industries that stand out? I think Samsung is building almost all its global cell phones in Vietnam.
I think half of Samsung's smartphones are produced in Vietnam, and Samsung also has an R&D center there. So it's not only about the lower end of manufacturing assembly of consumer electronics. Vietnam also has this ambition to move up the value chain, textile, footwear, obviously, and they're actually gaining more market shares in the U.S. market, which is I think is what a lot of the other ASEAN countries trying to compete with Vietnam, but not successfully.
So great story. Domestically, lots of focus on growth. Exports still very, very successful. But what are some of the risks here, particularly on the external side? What could derail potentially the growth process?
I think the biggest downside risk here is really on the trade front, which is the trade environment. If we look back at history, how China achieved its impressive double-digit growth, it was after China joined the WTO in 2001, and the trade environment back then was a lot more liberalized than today. Today, we see increasing protectionism, and there's a lot of back and forth, and still a lot of uncertainty on the tariffs front.
That certainly is a risk for all emerging markets. I think they're looking to export the way to prosperity, but it does also mean you have to focus more on the domestic side if you want to achieve double-digit growth. But it sounds like Vietnam is doing that. Now, lastly, Yun, how does Vietnam compare with some of its ASEAN peers? Is it sort of the standout economy when it comes to growth? Is it the shining pupil among the ASEAN, Southeast Asian economies? How would you put Vietnam into context?
Absolutely. I would characterize Vietnam as the model student here in Southeast Asia.
The star pupil of Southeast Asia.
The star, yes, it is. It's very impressive what Vietnam has achieved for the past 10 to 20 years. And Vietnam really captured that moment, with this increasing trade tensions between China and the U.S. And I think, one thing about the talent cultivation in Vietnam is increasing very fast. Vietnam has been very much catching up with other more mature.
On the talent, I got to ask you, how does Vietnam rank in terms of, global rankings of high school students? I hear it does rather well.
Yeah, so if we look at the PISA score.
OECD PISA kind of comparisons on high school students across the world.
Yeah, that's right. So if we look at the PISA score as a gauge here, number one, the highest score in ASEAN is Singapore. And guess who is number two? It's Vietnam.
Vietnam. There you go. Well, Yun, fascinating story in Vietnam. We got to stay close to it, certainly with these new ambitions being rolled out, double-digit growth. And it sounds like Vietnam has a shot actually in delivering that. It might be a stretch, but certainly it does have the potential to achieve double-digit growth. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another great episode of Under the Banyan Tree. To our listeners here in Asia, you'll still be able to get your weekly fix of Asian markets and economics next week, despite the Lunar New Year holiday. My regular co-host, Harold van der Linde, and I will be landing as normal on your podcast platform of choice next Thursday. All the best and take care until then.
Thank you for joining us at HSBC Global Viewpoint. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. Make sure you're subscribed to stay up to date with new episodes.